After studying this module, you shall be able to effectively understand monopolistic competition as a distinct market structure, learn about the pricing and output decisions taken in the real business environment, identify the market form in terms of equilibrium determination, and differentiate it from the two extreme market structures, that is, perfect competition and monopoly. Evaluate the occurrence of excess capacity and analyze firms and businesses to adapt this market structure in an operational manner to their behavior.
The classical theory of price up to the year 1920 included two main models, perfect competition and monopoly. However, these two were extreme cases of market structure. In the real world, economic behavior of these kinds were hardly observed in any given situation. So, the assumptions given either in perfect competition or under monopoly did not really occur. There were several empirical facts which could not be explained, and there were always some deviations from the assumption. For example, the assumption of homogeneous products in perfect competition did not resemble the products available in the market.
Let us begin by understanding monopolistic competition as a blend of both monopoly and perfect competition, which can be observed from industries with similar market structures. It is an imperfect market structure, but it is a more realistic form found in day-to-day markets. In industries such as shoes, restaurants, soft drinks, and clothing, etc. Products are homogeneous, but with a slight differentiation. They are close, but not perfect substitutes for the buyers. For example, the soft drinks like Pepsi and Coke are homogeneous but little different products with respect to brand name, packing design, advertising, etc. This form of market can be seen as a market structure where there is competition among a large number of monopolists, and therefore it is named as monopolistic competition. Now we shall turn to the features of monopolistic competition, which can be broadly viewed as: first, product differentiation; second, industry and product group; third, free entry and exit; fourth, number of buyers and sellers; fifth, non-price competition; and sixth, independent behavior. We look at the features of monopolistic competition in detail. The first feature, that is product differentiation, wherein the products produced by different firms are distinct or heterogeneous. It implies that the product of same firm are close substitutes to each other. To bring about uniqueness, producers make their products different from others consciously. They adopt various ways to set their products apart from the others. For example, soft drinks manufacturers like Pepsi, Coke, and Thumbs Up, etc., simply change the chemical composition, appearance, brand name, advertising, or packing material, etc., to make new and differentiated products attractive for buyers. Thus, in monopolistic competition, firms produce homogeneous but slightly differentiated products. This differentiation can be attributed to real or imaginary differences in quality. The second feature is the concept of industry and product group. Under perfect competition, industry is defined as a collection of firms producing a homogeneous product. However, in case of differentiated products, we define an industry as firms producing close substitutes as product groups. Product group, in turn, cannot be precisely defined, as the degree is a relative concept. So, according to Chamberlain, product groups should include products which are closely related and which are close technological and economic substitutes. The demand for each single product is highly elastic. When the price of other products in the group change, the demand for this product shifts. According to Chamberlain, products forming the group should have high price and cross elasticities. The third feature is free entry and exit. There is freedom of entry and exit from the product group. Being attracted by supernormal profits earned by some firms, new firms will enter into the product group. Similarly, if existing firms are making losses, firms will quit the group. Moving on to the fourth feature, which is number of buyers and sellers. There are a large number of sellers who sell similar but non-identical products in the market. So, individual firm has limited control over market price. There are also large number of buyers in the marketplace. The next feature we look at is non-price competition. Non-price competition is observed in monopolistic competition. In order to increase the demand for their products, firms engage themselves in non-price competition through advertisements, by giving free gifts, or offering extra saving on packages, etc., which can be clearly seen from these advertisements. Finally, the last feature we shall see is that of independent behavior. Firms in monopolistic competition behave independently, and because of large number of buyers and sellers, the economic impact of one firm's decision does not affect any other firm in the group. This indicates that there is no rivalry among firms in the group. To understand the occurrence of equilibrium under monopolistic competition, we first need to look at the assumptions analyzing firms' behavior. Under monopolistic competition, the group demand curve of the products which are close substitutes to each other is negatively sloped. So, it is assumed that all the firms in the group are identical, facing similar demand and cost conditions. Thus, if all the firms charge the same price, then they will have identical market shares. The following two heroic assumptions are made. First, the demand curve of all firms are assumed to be symmetrical, implying that market share of every firm is same and equal to a constant proportion of total market demand. And second, it is also assumed that both average and marginal cost curves are symmetrical for each firm. Taking our attention to the concept of individual equilibrium, we see that under monopolistic competition, the position and elasticity of demand curve for the product of firms depends upon the availability of competing substitutes and their prices. Other things like substitutes produced by other firms, prices charged, etc., remaining the same. As close substitutes of the firm's products are available in the market, the demand for the products of individual firm under monopolistic competition is fairly elastic. The individual equilibrium under monopolistic competition in short run is graphically shown in the figure where DD is the demand curve for the product of an individual firm, the nature and prices of all substitutes being given. This demand curve DD is also the average revenue curve of the firm, and marginal revenue curve is given by MR. AC shows the average cost curve of the firm, while MC is the marginal cost curve. Given these demand and cost conditions, a firm will adjust its price and output at the level which maximizes total profits. In order to show maximum profits, firm will equate marginal cost with marginal revenue as shown at point E in the figure. Price is determined as MQ equals OP and quantity of output produced is OM. The area RSQP indicates the amount of supernormal profits made by the firm. In the short run, the firm in equilibrium may make losses too if the demand conditions for its product are not so favorable relative to cost conditions. The figure shows the case of a firm making losses equal to the area GTKH. Thus, a firm in equilibrium under monopolistic competition may be making supernormal profits or losses depending upon the position of the demand curve relative to the position of the average cost curve in short run. Further, a firm may be making only normal profits even in the short run if the demand curve happens to be tangent to the average cost curve. Turning our attention to group equilibrium, we see that each firm within a group has monopoly of its own particular product. However, its market is interwoven with its competitors who produce closely related products. The price and output decisions of a firm will affect his rival firms, who may in turn react to the prices and output policies. It is thus observed in group equilibrium that the interdependence of the various producers upon one another is a prominent feature of monopolistic competition. The qualitative differences among the products lead to large variations in cost and demand curves of the various firms. The demand curve of the products of various firms differ in respect of elasticity as well as position. Similarly, cost curves of the various firms differ in respect of shape and position. As a result of these conditions, for each firm, there will be differences in prices, in outputs, and profits of the various firms in the group. Chamberlain, in monopolistic competition, makes that under the heroic assumption, both demand and cost curves for all the products are uniform throughout the group. To facilitate exposition of this theory, Chamberlain introduces a further assumption which has been called Symmetry Assumption by Professor Stigler. It states that the number of firms being large under a monopolistic competition and individuals' actions regarding prices and output adjustment will have a negligible effect upon his numerous competitors, so that they will not think of retaliation for readjusting their prices and outputs. Now, let us look at group equilibrium under monopolistic competition in the long run, where the demand and cost curves of each of the firms in the group are DD and LAC as shown. Each firm will set price OP at which marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue at point E, and hence profits are maximum. Although all firms are making supernormal profits, there is no reason for anyone to cut down price below OP. These supernormal profits will attract new firms in the field. New entrants are free to produce closely related products which are very similar to the products of existing firms. Thus, under monopolistic competition, there can be freedom of entry only in the sense of freedom to produce close substitutes. When the new firms, attracted by supernormal profits enjoyed by the existing firms, enter into the field, the market would be shared between more firms, and as a result, the demand curve for the product of each firm will shift downwards, that is, to the left. This process of entry of new firms and the resultant shift in the demand curve to the left will continue until the average revenue curve becomes tangent to the average cost curve, and abnormal profits are completely wiped out, as shown in the figure, where average revenue curve is tangent to average cost curve at point T. As we can see in the diagram, marginal cost and marginal revenue curves will intersect each other exactly vertically below T. Therefore, the firm is in long run equilibrium, but setting price as LT or OK and producing OL quantity of the product. Because average revenue is equal to average cost, the firm will be making only normal profits. Since all firms are alike in respect of demand and cost curves, the average revenue curves of all will be tangent to their average cost curves, and all firms will therefore be earning only normal profits. For understanding equilibrium of monopolistic competition, according to Chamberlain, we try to understand his approach, which makes use of two types of demand curves: the perceived demand curve and the proportional demand curve. The demand curve of individual firm, as perceived by it, describes the demand for the product of one firm on the assumption that all other firms keep the prices of their products constant. On the other hand, the proportional demand curve facing an individual firm shows the demand of the product when the prices of all firms of the product group change simultaneously in the same direction and by the same amount, so that they charge same or uniform price. So, the proportional demand curve of a firm will be less elastic than its perceived demand curve, since equal change in price by all firms of the industry simultaneously will prevent the movement of customers from one seller to another. Now, let us look at perceived and proportional demand curves diagrammatically. We see from the diagram that the proportional demand curve of each firm slopes downward and is the fractional part of the total market demand curve. The greater the number of firms in a product group, the smaller the share of an individual firm at a given price. Therefore, the proportional demand curve facing an individual firm shifts to the left as more and more firms enter to the product group or industry. The proportional demand curve d dash and the perceived demand curve small d dash d are shown graphically in the figure. An individual firm perceives that its demand is elastic and it can increase its profit by cutting down its price. Therefore, we construct the perceived demand curve small d dash d passing through point A as being more elastic than the proportional demand curve capital D dash D. However, since each firm in the product group will think independently that its price reduction will have a negligible effect upon each of his rivals and therefore assumes that others would keep their prices constant, the actual movement will not be along the perceived demand curve small d dash d, but along the proportional demand curve, capital D dash D. Therefore, capital D dash D shows the actual sales by each firm when prices of all change equally and identically. Moving on to the short-run equilibrium under Chamberlain's approach, we see that the firm is initially at point A on proportional demand curve capital D dash D in figure. Firm's perceived demand curve small d0 dash d0 has been drawn from point A. Each firm's share of demand for its product is equal to OM0 and all of them are charging uniform price OP0 with firm's initial position at A on proportionate demand curve capital D dash T. It perceives that it can increase profits by cutting down price below OP0, thinking that other firms would not react. It is seen from figure that if firm cuts down price to OP1, it can maximize its profits by producing OM1 output, which is demanded at price OP1, provided others do not react to it. The perceived marginal revenue curve MR0 corresponding to the perceived demand curve D0 D0 intersects the marginal cost curve MC at OM1 level of output. Thus, given the perceived demand curve D0 D0 passing through point A on the proportional demand curve, the profit maximizing output is equal to OM1, which implies that the firm will have advantage to lower its price from OP0 to OP1 so as to raise quantity demanded of its product to OM1 level. Each firm in monopolistically competitive industry will perceive independently that if they lower price below the prevailing one, they can attract customers from the others, thinking that others would not react. But since all firms would try to cut down their prices, thinking others would not react, each firm will not be in equilibrium at point A. Instead, the firm will find themselves at point B on the proportional demand curve, getting a proportionate share of the increase in market demand at the lower price OP1. Thus, each firm will be working at. Thus, we can clearly see that as a result of price cutting, the perceived demand curve of each firm will slide down the proportional demand curve to point B. With point B on the new perceived demand curve D1 D1, the firm thinks that it can increase its profits if it lowers its price below OP1, provided that others will not react, because the new perceived marginal revenue curve MR1 corresponds to the new perceived demand curve D1 D1 lies above the marginal cost curve MC in the relevant region. Though its earlier attempts to increase profits by lowering price was retaliated by others, each firm again believes that if it lowers the price and thereby bringing about increase in quantity demanded of its product, it can increase its profits. Now, if each firm thinks in the same way and cuts down its prices independently, it would not succeed in snatching away customers from rival firms. As a result, each firm, instead of moving along to a point on the perceived demand curve for maximizing its profits, will land itself on the proportional demand curve, getting the same proportionate share from the increase in quantity demanded of the product at a lower price. In this way, the process of price cutting competition and sliding down of perceived demand curve on the proportional demand curve would continue until a firm has reached a point where it cannot perceive to increase its profits by reducing its price. The firm in this situation will be maximizing its profits and will therefore have no advantage to lower the price of the product further. As a result of price competition, the perceived demand curve has slided down to the point H on the proportional demand curve, capital D dash D, and accordingly, price has fallen to OP2, and each firm is producing and selling OM3 output as we can see in the figure. Each firm will be in equilibrium at this price output combination and will have no incentive to change its price. Thus, according to Chamberlain's approach, short run equilibrium under monopolistic competition is reached and firm will be maximizing its profits when the following two conditions are satisfied. First, the price output combination is such that perceived marginal revenue curve intersects the marginal cost curve so that MR equals MC, and second, the price output combination at which MR equals to MC is the point at which perceived demand curve small d dash d intersects the proportional demand curve capital D dash D. Thus, in the short run, the firm's equilibrium occurs at the point on proportional demand curve and perceived demand curve at which marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Further, we look at the long run equilibrium in Chamberlain's approach. Attracted by supernormal profits enjoyed by firms in short run, new firms will enter the industry. Due to entry of new firms, the market demand curve for the good would be shared by more firms, causing proportionate demand curve to shift to the left. Along with shift of proportionate market demand curve, perceived demand curve will also shift to the left. The process of entry will continue until perceived demand curve small d dash t becomes tangent to long run average cost curve LAC. It is also seen that due to availability of more substitutes as a result of entry of more firms, the perceived demand curve becomes more elastic. The tangency of the perceived demand curve small d dash t with long run average cost curve LAC shows that firms are making only normal profits, so there will be no tendency for new firms to enter into the group. Consequently, when perceived demand curve small d dash t becomes tangent to the average cost curve LAC, the product group as a whole will be in equilibrium. When sufficient number of new firms have entered the group and price cutting has been made, the demand curve small d dash t has fallen to the position of tangency with the long run average cost curve LAC. The proportional demand curve capital D dash T will intersect small d dash t and LAC at the point of tangency. If too many firms have entered the group, the perceived demand curve small d dash t will fall to the position below that of tangency and firms will be making losses. As a result, some firms will leave the group and capital D dash D along with small d dash d curve will shift to the right. It can now be said that the following two conditions are necessary for group equilibrium. Firstly, the perceived demand curve must be tangent to the LAC, and secondly, the proportional demand curve facing individual firm must intersect both the perceived demand curve and LAC at the point of tangency. In Chamberlain's approach, the two competitive forces, entry of firms and price cutting behavior, are observed to be operating simultaneously, and these force the D-D curve to shift and become tangent to the LAC curve. Then the capital D-D curve cuts both of them at the point of tangency, which brings group equilibrium in Chamberlain's approach. Lastly, we look at the occurrence of excess capacity under monopolistic competition. In the long run equilibrium of monopolistic competition, the perceived demand curve is tangent to the LAC curve. So, both the perceived demand curve and the LRAC are downward sloping at point of tangency. However, unlike perfect competition, firm's equilibrium would never be at the minimum point of the LAC curve. So, it is argued that the firm's output under monopolistic competition is not the optimum output from the welfare point of view, and there exists excess capacity, which is an underutilization of the resources of the society. The optimum output is associated with the minimum point of the LAC curve. So, excess capacity is the difference between the optimal output and the actual output attained by the firm in the long run, as shown in the diagram. Here, ON is the optimal output as it corresponds to the minimum point of LAC curve, and OQ is the long run equilibrium output in a monopolistic competition. Thus, excess capacity equals to ON minus OQ, which is equal to QN. So, according to Chamberlain, excess capacity is equal to Qn, which has arisen due to free entry of the firms but absence of price competition.